Define Gimel Amud Aleph will begin Ayin Beis Amud Beis, 10 lines from the bottom. We learned the halacha that if there are separate residences in a chatzer, there's separate residences, separate diras, houses in a chatzer. Each resident has to contribute independently to the erev chatzeres. If areas are not considered to be residences, then they don't have to contribute separately. The Gemara now will discuss what is considered to be a residence and therefore requires an independent contribution to the erev, and what is considered to be not a residence. If a person has a beis shar, he has a gatehouse, or an achsadra, a portico, or mirpeses, a porch, or a balcony, he has use of it, which is in the chasr of his friend. It does not ask. It does not restrict. So, for instance, if a person had a house, he had a house in the chasr, and there was a gatehouse, and someone else had the use of the gatehouse, that's not considered a resident. The person that's living in the gatehouse, that's the way Taisus explains this, the person who lives in the gatehouse is not required to contribute independently to the erev chaseres. So, it doesn't answer on the rest of them, and they don't have to contribute. But Beis Teven, Beis Boker, Beis Esim, Beis Oitzres, if there was a room that stored straw for the animals, or it was a barn, or it was a woodshed, or a Beis Oitzres, or storage houses, Hareza Oisra Lov, it does answer. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Eino Oisra Makam Dira Bilvad. He says these areas do not answer. It's only a Makam Dira, where people live in, places where they live in. Now, if people actually lived in these areas, if they did live in these areas, then in a chanami. But if they're just used to store wood, or it's a barn for animals, etc., or other types of storage areas, then Rabbi Yehuda says it does not answer. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masechet ben Anafcha. He says Shayelo Chamesh Chatzeres B'Usha. He had 5 chatzeres in the city of Usha. Ubal Maisel v'nei Chachamim. V'Amru, and the Chacham said, Eino Yisrael ela beis dira bilvad. The only thing that answers is a beis dira. Beis dira salkadaita. You think that any house that it answers, meaning if a person lives in a gatehouse, would it answer? Ella ema, rather what it means to say malkam dira. What it means is a malkam dira, a place where people usually live in. That's what it answers. A place that is usually a place where people live in. That's the way Miri explains it. So my malkam dira, what is considered a malkam dira? Rav says it's malkam pita. He says it's a place where the person eats, the place of his bread. Ushmu lomar malkam lina, a place where he sleeps. Now, as we'll see from the Gemara, it will emerge from the Gemara, the Shakalataria, and the way the Ritva explains it, is we're talking where there is no indication of really where his primary residence is. That this machloikas is, if we have no other factors, no other indication or evidence that the person really is considered that this area is his primary house or the other. So meaning all things being equal, we don't know where he really wants to live. We really don't know where he considers his main residence to be. There's a machlokes, Rav Shmuel is at the malkam dira, malkam pita. But if we have outside evidence, if we have evidence that shows that really he considered his primary residence to be one or the other, then that's his primary residence. We're talking here, all things being equal. We don't know where he really considers to be his primary residence. What is Gairim? So that's the machlokes that Rav says Malkam Pita and Shmuel says Malkam Lina. Meisvei, the Gemara is asking Kasha now on Rav from the following. It says in the Braisa, the shepherds or the watchmen that watch the figs as they're being dried in the field, or the guards in our huts, or the people that are guarding the fruit that is in the field. Bisman shadarakan alalin bayir, when they go sleep in the city, harein kan sheir, they're considered like residents of the city. Bisman shadarakan alalin basada, when they sleep in the fields, yesh lam alpaim l'chol ruach. They have 2,000 amas in each direction from the place where they sleep, from the daled amas of where they're sleeping. Now, the context over here, this Bryce it's talking not about Eruvin Chatzeres, it's talking about Tchumim. That a person has Alpai Mama in each direction. If he's in a city, the whole city is considered to be his Dalet Amas, and you measure the Alpai Mama from the outskirts of the city. If he's not in the city, if he's out in the open, from wherever he is, his place at Dalet Amas, you measure the 2,000 Amas. Now we're bringing an analogy from the case of Tchumim. What is a dira? What constitutes a dira legabe Tchumim to what constitutes a dira legabe Eruvin Chatzeres. So it says that the guards, the Shomrim, if they sleep in the city, then their Malkum Shvisa is considered the city, and you measure Lapaim Amma from the outskirts of the city. If they sleep in the field, then their Malkum Shvisa is the field, and you measure the Alpaim Amma from their place in the field. So this would seem to indicate that the place of the dira, the Malkum dira, is where the person sleeps. Now, in these cases, the watchmen, they eat in the city. They're eating the meals in the city. Nevertheless, it would seem to be that the determining factor is where they sleep. So, l'chera, that's a right to Shmuel and a kashan Rav. Rav would answer, Hasam and Ansah, the Mamtalo Rift, Hasam Tzvein. Over there, no, there's an Ansadi. That if they would be brought to them the food in the field, if they would have had food in the field, they would sleep, then they would sleep in the field as well, and it would be preferable for them. It would be preferable for them to have their food in this field if they could have had. Meaning, as we said before, based on the Ritva, and we learn it out from the Gemara here and further as well, that this machlekes Rav and Shmuel is only if there's no outside factors. We don't have any other evidence as to where they consider their primary residence to be or where they would prefer to be. Then it's a machlekes, is it Makam Pisa or is it the Makam of the Lina? But over here we know that they would prefer to be in the field. That's where their work is and that's where they have to be. They only go to the city because they don't have food in the field. But if they would be, that would be their primary residence. So now, here we're talking in a case where they don't eat in the field and they don't sleep in the field. So here we say that, in such a case, we say that, well, wherever they sleep, that's considered to be their primary residence. The place that they sleep is considered to be their primary residence. That's where it is. Because they, in a case where they are sleeping in the city, we say that they are sleeping in the city and they're eating in the city. Now, if they sleep in the field, even though they're not eating in the field, but they would have wanted to eat in the field, so therefore, the fact that they're sleeping in the field, even though they don't eat there, but they sleep in the field, and they would prefer to eat in the field if they had food over there, therefore we would consider that's enough to consider the field to be a primary residence. Even though Lamaisa they're not eating in the field, but they would have wanted to eat in the field had they had the food. Therefore, sleeping would be sufficient to consider the field a primary residence. Amr of Yosef, he said, we know that Yosef was chola, he got sick, and Shachach Talmud, he forgot his learning. He said he didn't hear the Shmaitz of Rav. Amr Le'abaya said, Amrit Lan, you taught it to us, V'amrit Lan, and you taught it to us regarding the following, regarding our Mishnah. The brothers who were eating by the father's table, but they go to their own individual houses to sleep. They have to contribute separately to the Erev, to the Eruvin Chatzeres. And you said, we're Medaik from here, Makam Lina Gairim. And you see from here that the place where you sleep, that is where determines where the person's primary residence is. And so you Even the Va'amra Va'amrina Loch, we said to you that you can see from here the Malkam Lina's Gairim. Va'amra Lan Allah, and you answered to us, and you said, no, your diuk is not quite right, because Amar Allah, Amar V'Yiramarab, Makabli Parashanu. We're not talking over here in the Mishnah where they are actually eating at the father's table. If they would be eating on the father's table, then it would not make a difference where they go to sleep. We're talking over here that they're only supported by the father. They're not actually eating at the table. If they were eating at the table, Rav would say, then notwithstanding where they go to sleep, that would be their primary residence. But they're not eating at the table. They're only being supported. And therefore, if they go to sleep in their houses, they have to contribute separately to the Eruv. So we have similar scenarios. In the Mishnah we were talking about a father and sons. What about a person who has 5 wives and they're also getting support from the husband? Or v'chamisha avodim mikam prasmi rabeim, or 5 slaves that are being supported by their masters. On the fine Taisus indicates that we're talking about over here about an Eved Kanani, but the Ritva is learning that it's not even literally an Eved, meaning it's a servant, but somebody that serves the person and he's being supported. So what's the case over here? What's the halach over here by the wives, by the avodim? Do they have to contribute separately to the Eruv or not? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Matir ben Noshim. He is Matir ben Noshim. He does not consider the wives to be independent, and therefore they do not have to contribute separately. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Matir ba'avodim. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira rather is Matir ben Noshim v'oiser ba'avodim, but he answers with avodim. He says with avodim they do have to contribute separately. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Matir ba'avodim v'oiser ben Noshim. He says just the opposite. He says the woman do have to contribute separately. Omar Rav, my time with the Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, what's the reason that he says that the servant is not considered to be independent? He's considered to be part of his master's household, and therefore he does not have to contribute separately. It says that Daniel was at the gate of the king. Now, Daniel was not always at the gate of the king. He was not always at Nebuchadnezzar's gate. He was engaged in his Torah and his Tefillah, but it considers him to be at the gate of the king. He's always there in the service of the king. So therefore, you see from here that the servant is considered to be part of the household of the master. So that's where his residence is. That's where he always is. So you see from here that the servant is considered to be, he always has the service of the master on his mind, and therefore he's considered to be part of that household, and therefore he's not independent. He does not have to contribute independently, separately to the Eruv. So Pshita ben Etzelav Kiram, son and the father, so that's what we learned in our mission. Isha Etzel Ba'alav Eved Etzel Rabba, that's Plukta, the Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi ben Bava. That's the machlekes that we just had. But now we have the following question. Talmud Etzel Rabba and Mat. What about the din of a Talmud and a Rebbe? Does he have to contribute separately or not? So if the Talmud is supported by the master, does he have to contribute separately or not? So we see over here, and the various medayik from here, that support alone is not enough to be considered part of the household and to be subordinate. Just because a person is supported, but if he's supported and he eats and sleeps in his own house, that alone is not enough to consider him subordinate to the one that's supporting him. And he would have to contribute separately. The issue over here is that someone is being supported, but he also has a relationship. For instance, like in our Mishnah with the father and sons, or in the machlokes that we had by avodim and wives, there's a relationship. So the question over here is if the Talmud is being supported by the master, and he has a relationship because there's a Talmud, do we consider this to be like a father and son? How do we consider this? So Tashma Devei Rabbi Chia Amar Ein Anu Tzrich L'Arav. We don't have to join in an Eruv. Shareinu Soimchem Al Shulchan Rabbi Chia, because we're supported by Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia Bar Rabbi Amar because we're being supported by Rebbe. So you see that the Talmud and Rebbe relationship is strong enough, and therefore if they're being supported by the Rebbe, they do not have to contribute separately to the Eruv. 5 residents to Chotzer, they collected their Eruv. So, and they collected the Eruv. Now, when they collected the Eruv to allow them to carry into the Chotzer, now when they take their Eruv to another place, so they're taking their Eruv to with a different Chotzer, with a neighboring Chotzer, Eruv Echad L'Kulan, so they were ma'arav together. Now they want to be ma'arav with a different chotzer. Do they have to contribute separately, or are they all considered one and they don't have to contribute separately? He said, he said, one eruv suffices for all. But brothers, they are considered, when we say that the brothers, that they are considered like they are collected the Eruv. It's considered like that. It says in the Mishnah, if there is no other residence, then they don't have to be mishtatev separately. So it says that brothers, it's like they are considered to have been ma'arav together. And it says that they need an erev l'kol echad v'echad. Now at this point, the way Abaye is understanding it is that achin, if it says in the Mishnah that brothers, if there is no other residence in the chotzer, they don't have to contribute. Now the Mishnah says that it says strichen erev l'kol echad v'echad. The way Abaye is understanding it at this point is there's no other residence in the chotzer. They don't have to contribute, therefore, to an erev. They don't have to make an erev. But if they want to be ma'arav with residents of a different chotzer, then they all have to contribute. So Abaye is understanding the Mishnah as similar to this case, that it's as if they made an erev together, and now when they want to be ma'arev with a different chotzer, they do have to contribute each one separately. Now Rama said they don't. Rama said erech l'kulam. Rama answers, no, he said that's not the understanding of the Mishnah. The understanding of the Mishnah is that in their chotzer, the chotzer that they are in, there are other residents. So we say that since there's other residents, the migo the hani asre hani name asre. What it means to say is in the Mishnah is that they have to be mishtatev in the air for their own chotzer. If there's no other residents in the chotzer, in their own chotzer, they don't have to contribute. But if there are other residents in the chotzer, and therefore an erev is required regardless, and the father has to be ma'ar regardless, so migoy that the father has to be joined in an erev, they also separately have to join. It's not talking about your case over here, the case where they want to be ma'ar with a separate chotzer. And it's mistabra to say that what it requires the sons, the brothers, to be mishtatev, to join separately in the erev is talking when there are other diurin in the chotzer, and migo that they have to make they aser, then the father has to mishtatev, they also have to be mishtatev. Because it says when is it that they're required? And the Mishnah says, when do the brothers have to be mishtatev? When do they have to join in? Where the erev is not placed in the trachna, it's not placed in their house. But if the erev was placed in the mansion, or there are no other residents in the chotzer, they don't have to make an erev. So that means that they don't have to make an eruv. They don't have to be mishtat if there's no other residents. But where there are residents, that's where they have to be mishtat, v'shma mina. So therefore you see that the reason that they have to be mishtatev is because there are other residents. That's why they have to be mishtatev. There are other residents in this chotzer. By minei Rav Chia bar Avim Rav Sheshes b'nei If you have yeshiva bachrim that are eating, they eat their bread in the inns in the city, or in a valley. There's a valley where they have inns, and that's where they go to eat. Also, but they go to sleep in the yeshiva. Where we measure the tchum, the alpine over the tchum, where do we measure from? What is considered to be their residence? Do we measure it from the yeshiva? Or do we measure it from the valley? Where do we measure the alpaima? What is considered the residence? So they're sleeping in the yeshiva, they're eating in the valley. Where do we measure it from? We measure it from the yeshiva, from the place where they sleep. Well, if a person wants to put down an Erev, so he's in a city, he wants to, for instance, go further in one direction. So he's in a city, he puts the Erev down, Alpai Mama, what's in the city, and then in order for him to go further Alpai Mama beyond the Tchum. So he's now places his Erev down, and he goes back and sleeps in the city. So he puts his Erev within Alpaimam. He goes back to the city to sleep. When we measure the Alpaimama, we measure it not from where he sleeps, we measure it from where he put his food down, where he put down the Erev. So don't you see, it's not from where he sleeps, it's from where the food is. Where it says no, Bahu and Ansari. Over there we don't measure it from where he sleeps. Over there we measure it from the Tchum. Why is that? Because there's an Ansari. It's clear. We have outside evidence. We know he wants to go in that direction. And we know that he wants his Mokum Shvisa to be where he placed the Tchum. Uban Ansari, Bahu, Bahado and Ansari, there's an Ansari. Bahu and Ansari, and in the case of an Arab, there's also an Ansari. So there's, in the case of the yeshiva, Ubado and Ansari, there's a case in the yeshiva, there's an Ansari, Bahu and Ansari, and in the case of the Tchum, there's an Ansari. In the case of the yeshiva, there's an Ansari because we know that they want to be in the yeshiva. They go to the inn because that's where the food is. If the food would be there in the yeshiva, if they would serve in the yeshiva, they would prefer it. And in the case of the Tchum, that if a person could sleep in the place where he made the Tchum, he would prefer it. In both cases, are non-sadi. So like we said before, the machlekes, whether it's the Malkum Lin or Pita, is if there is no outside evidence, there's no ansadi, that one is the primary residence or the other. But in these two cases, in both of them, there's an ansadi. In the case of the yeshiva, there's an ansadi. They would prefer to be in the yeshiva. They only go to the valley to eat because the food is not being served in the yeshiva. If it would be, then the yeshiva would be the preference. So there's an ansadi that's their primary residence. So that's where we measure the tchum. In the case of the tchum, we know he wants to go further in that direction. So he's placing his tchum there. Now he comes back to the city to sleep because that's where his house is. If he had a house over there where his tchum was, where his shvisa was, he would prefer that because that's where he wants to be and that's where he wants to go. It's just that he doesn't have a house over there. So it's an ansani that there, in the place where he put down the pass, there it's an ansani that's where his primary residence is, and that's where he wants it to be. So if we have an ansani that one place or the other is a primary residence, then we have an ansani, then wherever it is, whether it's a place where he eats or sleeps, if we have an independent ansadi, as long as you have one of these factors, that's considered his malkam shvisa, his dira, his residence. The machlekes Rav and Shmuel, whether it's malkam pisa or malkam lina, is if we have no ansadi, we have no outside evidence, then it's a machlekes which one is considered to be the primary residence. So he says, in these cases where you have a father and a son and Rav and a Talmud, so we have the following shilas. Kiram domi or kichirim domi? Do we treat them as Rabbim or Yechidim? As we learned before, if you have two Chatzeros, an inner one and an outer one, the inner one has access through, as a right of way, through the outer one to the street. Now, if they're place the inner one. There are rabim, there are many over there, meaning so they can't carry. They can't carry within their chotzer. It's a place that it's also b'mekayman. The right of way will also on the outer chotzer as well. If it's only a singular person, one single person that's in the inner chotzer, so he doesn't need any eruv, he doesn't want to aser over here, his right of way, his passage through the outer one to the street will not aser on him. So the question over here is, if in the inner chotzer there's a father and sons, do we treat it as many people, or do we treat it as yechidim, or do we treat it as individuals? Do they aser on the outer chotzer? Does the right of way aser on the outer chotzer or not? Tzrichem eruv or ain't tzrichem eruv? Do they have to contribute separately to the eruv, or do they not have to contribute separately to an eruv chatzeres? So that is simply the case of the Mishnah. What's the Gemara Shailas? Taisus and explains, and he learns in Rashi and he explains later, is that the issue over here is how to learn the Mishnah. Is the Mishnah referring to a case where they're actually eating at the father's table or being supported by the father? So that's the issue. Now, do we say that if there's nobody else in the chotzer, only the father and sons, that they don't have to contribute to an eruv? Is that if they're eating at the father's table, or if they're merely being supported? That's the shaila. Do we learn it like Rav or like Shmuel? And the third shaila is Momi Shalem Nitr B'Lecha V'Kayra. Oy Ein Nitr B'Lecha V'Kayra. The third shaila is if they have a movli. So you have one chotzer, there's a father, another chotzer, there's a son, another chotzer, there's another son. Their chatzeres open up to the movli, and it opens to the Rishus HaRabim. Now we say that a movli that's closed on three sides, it's open to the Rishus HaRabim, you put a lechi v'koira, and it allows you to carry in the movli if there's a sheet of mevuos. But that's only if you have batim v'chatzeres psuchim into the movli. It's only if you have at least two chatzeres with two batim that open into the movli, then you consider it a movli, and it's niter belechi v'koira. Otherwise, it's not considered a movli, it's considered a chotzer, and needs a pas dalet. The question is, if we have father in one chotzer and sons in the others, do we view them independently and consider it as separate chatzeres, and therefore the street is considered a movi and it's nitr b'lech v'koyer, or do we consider them not to be independent and therefore it's not considered to be a movi, it's considered to be a chatzer and it's not nitr b'lech v'koyer? Amar le tenisu, we learned avu b'noi v'rav talmidoi. If you have these cases, a father and a son, a Rabbi and a Talmud, Bizman she'eni ma'im diurim, hareim ki yechidim. It says when there's no other residents, they are like yechidim. They are considered to be like yechidim. And therefore, the inner chotzer does not aser on the other chotzer. It's considered all to be one. Vein srichim la'arv. And they don't have to join separately in the erev. So the way Taisus is learning is it doesn't say that they're semchon al shulchan aviyam. So therefore, it doesn't say semchon al shulchan. Therefore, even if they're only supported and they're not eating at the table mamish, they don't have to join independently to the erev. You consider them all as one, not independent. And their movi is nitr b'lech v'kara, but nevertheless we say that their movi is considered lech v'kara. It's not considered as one in that regard. They're considered to be separate chatzeres, and therefore the movi is considered to be a movi, and it's nitr b'lech v'kara, and it's not considered a chatzer, which needs a pas. It's considered to be a movi, which is nitr b'lech v'kara.